thanks to all of you for being here. My name is Father Brian Christopher. I'm the superior here in Belize. I've been in Belize, was here from 2009 to 2014, and then I was back in the U.S. for 3 years, and then was lucky enough to come back down here in 2017. So this is a country that feels very much like home to me. It's a country that's very much a part of my heart. So it's wonderful to be able to serve and to be able to share stories with you about some of that. I am not going to lead us off, but I will ask KG veteran Sam Willson, who's down in southern Belize, to tell us a little bit about his vocation.
Okay, I'm down in southern Belize, in a place called Punta Gorda Town in the Toledo district. And mostly I work in the Mayan villages down here. And there's 36 villages and two sort of dominant languages down here, the Mopan and the Kekchi. So I spend an enormous amount of time in those villages. Sometimes that involves sort of, hiking through the jungle and getting to the church. Sometimes it takes several hours, to get there. But it's a real deep experience of enculturation, where the Maya culture meets the Catholic culture, and as a priest, sort of negotiating that line and being a fellow disciple with them and learning, but also being a shepherd for them. So it's been a very interesting 4 years down here, working in that context. My vocation is a long one, so I'm just going to give you sort of like three images to sort of understand my vocation story. The first is a car accident that I had back in the year 2000. I was working at the University of South Alabama as a professor, where I knew Father Robert Murphy at the Catholic Student Center before we were both Jesuits. And I was teaching English as a professor and going about my business. I didn't go to church. I really didn't, think much about religion. And I was just driving down the road one day, and a kid who had just gotten his license pulled out in front of me, and I hit him broadside going about 50 miles an hour. And he was not hurt, but I was, and the front of the car caved in, and the steering wheel went into my chest, and I couldn't breathe. And I fell out of the car onto the street. And ironically, I was moving out of my house at the time, and everything I owned was in the back seat. So I fall into the street, everything I own goes into the street. And as I fall out of the car, I can't breathe. And at that moment, for the first time, it must have been 25 years, I cried out to God and I said, please help me. Please help me. And at that moment, I could breathe again. Suddenly I could breathe again. And that got my attention. And I started going back to Mass a little bit here and there. Then I started going once a week, and then I started going every day. And then I started praying more. And then some people at the Catholic Student Center, where Father Murphy was, helped me to deepen my prayer life. And then the question of vocation began to sort of stir. And I knew I was called to be a priest, but I was very reluctant. So I eventually left academia, where I was teaching at South Alabama, and joined what's called a l'Arche community, where I lived with the disabled for several years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And that's sort of like the first image, and that's where it all started. That car accident that caused me to sort of wake up. And at the l'Arche community, I met a Father Joe Hill, who did the opening prayer. And it was he and another Jesuit named Carlos Esparza that kind of sparked my interest. They were talking about the formation, and I thought, maybe I could do that. I know I'm called to be a priest, but I don't know if it's diocesan or religious order, but let me try. And long story short, I entered into my formation and went through formation, novitiate with Father Pepe Ruiz and some of the other guys. And everything went pretty smooth until, and this is the second image, which is an image of me in a chapel with the Stations of the Cross, and at around midnight about my second year of what's called Regency, teaching high school. And I hated teaching high school. I was not cut out to be a high school teacher. I didn't like teaching high school. I couldn't wait to leave it, teaching high school. And finally, one night, it all came to a head after 2 years of really, really struggling. And I woke up in the middle of the night, went to the chapel, and looked at the Stations of the Cross. And I cried out to God and I said, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I can't stay here anymore. I can't teach. I don't know if I even have a vocation anymore. And as I was looking at one of the Stations of the Cross, that voice of the Holy Spirit, Jesus who speaks to the inner voice, the quietness in your heart, he said, well, if you want to leave, go ahead and leave. But before you do, you should know that you never once asked me for help. That you went through Regency these 2 years on your own, trying to do everything by yourself, and you never asked me once to carry that cross that you are carrying, and let me carry it for you. And if you let me carry it for you, you're going to make it through this. You'll be fine. And so I never forgot that. That stayed with me my entire formation since then, that when things get tough, and they do get tough, I asked Jesus, help me to carry that cross that's just a little heavy right now. Can you carry it for me? And he always does. But that was one of the big lessons in my formation, was Regency. Not one of my favorite parts of formation, but it was one of the most formative that I ever had, because it taught me that being a priest has nothing to do with my own sort of powers or my own intellect or my own will or my own strength. It's complete reliance on Jesus. No matter what he puts in front of you, you rely on him and you let him carry the heavy cross, especially when it gets too heavy. And then the third image is the day of my ordination. There I go through all that formation. Our formation is at least 12 years long, and all the ups and downs and the struggles. And there I was, face down on a marble floor in a church, and the Litany of the Saints was being sung. It was the day of my ordination. And I realized that my entire family was there. Many people that had been with me through that entire struggle of my formation were there, and they were all praying for me. And then not only were they praying for me, but all those saints that were being named as I was face down on the ground were praying for me. And I thought to myself, who am I that I could even be here? There I was, face down on the asphalt 15 years before, can't breathe, with everything I own on the street. And then 15 years later, I'm face down on a marble floor being ordained a priest. And I still think about it even this day, that if someone had walked up to me 20 years ago and said, 20 years from now, you're going to be in southern Belize as a Catholic priest working with the Mayan villagers in Mopan and Kekchi, I would have laughed in their face because it would have been so unbelievable to me. But to sum it all up, God has been good. God has been very, very good to me. And I'm so grateful for the Society of Jesus. I'm so grateful for my vocation, and always remembering that Christ has walked with me through that vocation all the way. And I know that as long as he's near me, and that I try to do the best I can, what he's asking me, even sometimes, here it's very, very difficult between cultures and having to hike through the jungles and all that stuff. It's not always, pleasant, but it's okay because he's with me, and I have this community, the Jesuits, to uphold me. So that's my story.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Sam. God. And if any of you are budding linguists, we do need people who can learn languages. So one of the things that Sam has done that's just so key is when he got there in the Toledo district, he started learning Kekchi, and he speaks enough Kekchi now he can celebrate mass and he can connect with people. So definitely, if any of you have that skill, we'd love to have you sign on the dotted line.
For the love of God, some help.
All right, I'm going to pick on Jeremy next. Father Jeremy Zipple is based here in Belize City. Father Jeremy, in some ways, is kind of like a utility hitter. He's just sort of, or maybe better to say, he's kind of like the Holy Spirit. He's sort of everywhere here. So he's the associate pastor at St. Martin de Porres Parish on the south side of Belize City, which is located in one of the tougher neighborhoods here in Belize. And then he's also a campus minister. He's part-time campus minister at St. John's College. And then he's also baker and videographer and all kinds of other things. So Jared, go ahead.
All right, thanks, BC. I really don't want to follow Sam, but oh well. I don't have nearly as dramatic a vocation story. But I grew up in a pretty Catholic family, South Mississippi, and public school kid. I knew I wanted to go to a Catholic university because I really hadn't had much Catholic education, and I ended up at a Jesuit school, Boston College. And I didn't know anything about the Jesuits, except that I had a European history teacher at Hattiesburg High. And I came down to Notre Dame in BC, basically. And I had originally said I was going to go to Notre Dame. And she said, Frau Thomas said, excellent, because the Jesuits will give you a fantastic education. I didn't know what the Jesuits were. I didn't really know what the Jesuits were going into BC, but I did end up choosing the Jesuits, not at Notre Dame. You know, it was a very formative 4 years, got involved in campus ministry and retreats. I also just had a number of Jesuit mentors in the classroom. I studied economics and kind of journalism on the side, and I had Jesuit mentors in both those fields. I remember thinking very seriously about joining the society my senior year, and a Jesuit who later became our provincial, Doug Marcouillet, at the time he was my economics professor, said, well, you should go do a retreat. You know, you ever done a silent retreat before? No. Okay. So I said, where do I do that? He said, well, I go to Sedalia, Colorado every year. It's really nice out there. He didn't tell me that I could have gone just a couple hours from my hometown in Mississippi over Grand Coteau, say. So I going to Denver and doing a retreat. I had a old Jesuit directing me there who told me I should pray about 3-4 hours a day if I could. So I'd go into the chapel at 9 a.m. And pray until Mass at noon, I guess it was. And I did that for several days. And he said, wow, you're really into this retreat. I said, well, I'm just doing what you told me to do. He's like, I meant I should have told you, you're not all at the same time, you know, a little here, a little here. That encounter with the exercises was really intense, not just because I was praying much more than I was supposed to be praying, but I really did find the exercises stirred something in my heart. Got back to BC though, and you know, back to being a senior at Boston College, and that whatever it was quickly dissipated. I tried to hide from it and run from it for a while. I took a job. I was an economics major. I took a job briefly working for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, research. I hated it, and I already knew that I had probably made a mistake studying economics, and so I found a volunteer teaching job in New York in October after I graduated. Went down there, and these Brothers of the Sacred Heart, it was a small order called the Brothers of the Sacred Heart. They actually have the only all-boys Catholic school in Mississippi, St. Stanislaus, down on the coast. But they took me on as a volunteer teaching in one of their schools, a K-8 Catholic school, for 2 years. There was a pivotal moment there. I really loved teaching. I was a math and a music teacher to junior high kids in this Catholic school, and I really loved that. And I was sort of thinking about what comes next, and two things happened. One, I had put in an application for McKinsey, which is a great, consulting firm, a really prestigious firm, and they called me up my second year of teaching out of the blue. I had put this application in 2 years earlier, I think, as somewhere in my senior year, and they said, hey, we found this application. We're interested in interviewing you if you're still interested. So I started this process of interviewing with them. And after kind of several rounds of this, one of their partners who was kind of shepherding my application called me up and he said, you know what, I'm going to just be blunt with you. You look really good on paper, but you're just not into this. You are not passionate about this. And you know, do you want to continue going forward with this? I was sort of devastated at the time. It was kind of a major ego slap, but I was glad he said it, because he was sort of teaching me something about Ignatian discernment that I hadn't really, you know, considered, you know, that indeed the Lord does speak to us through our deepest desires. And I was not finding consolation going down that route. What I was really happy doing was teaching, and this idea of being a Jesuit was still there. One of my Jesuit economics mentors sent a word. A college buddy of mine came down to New York after seeing him. He was a legendary Jesuit at BC, Bill Neenan. And my college buddy said, hey, by the way, I just saw Father Neenan and he wanted me to give you a message. He said, shit or get off the pot. So I heard that, and and the McKinsey thing had kind of, you know, gone south. And I said, I'm going to do it. I called up the vocation director and said, I'll enter. I had, at that time, I really thought I was just going to get it out of my system. I didn't have like any sort of big confirmation. It was just this inchoate feeling that this had been tugging me for a while, and I had to do something about it, at least to just clear it out of the system, you know. So I entered. Maybe if I had told the vocation director that, then they wouldn't let me enter. I don't know. Like, well, I'm just doing this to get out of the system. I'm not going to stick around. But I didn't say that, and lo and behold, I got to the novitiate and I liked it. And spiritual exercises were profound. The 30-day retreat was the most important thing that happened during those 2 years. I also came down to Belize though, and had a great long experiment, 6 months down in Belize, and took vows, and the rest is history. I mean, you know, the older I get and the longer I've been in the society, I've been in the society for 18 years now, like the vocation story gets longer, and really things that have happened subsequent to me entering and take vows are equally important at this point. And I won't talk about them too much in depth, except to say I had an unusual regency. I'm a filmmaker, and my provincial, this opportunity came up to go work at National Geographic Television in Washington, DC. And my provincial had an unusual regency and job himself. So he agreed to let me do that. And it was an incredible experience. I was there for 3 years. It was a really jarring experience in a lot of ways, because I could see a whole different path career-wise that my life could take. I could just quit and become a producer, you know, full-time director and producer, and forget about doing that with the Jesuits. So that was a big discernment, you know, that started pulling at me. And then I was just around, for the first time in my life, I grew up in South Mississippi, part of the Bible Belt. Then I went to a Jesuit Catholic university. This is the first time I was around people every day, working with people who, majority of whom were not religious, and who took science pretty seriously. So that was another little crisis, you know, a good one, how to rethink my faith in light of those questions, and that were being raised there. And also how to, I think, you know, I certainly have many friends to this day from that time, maybe how to force secular people to think about these questions a little bit too. I remember one time we were having lunch, and one of my colleagues and friends, this is early on now, she's a really smart person, Harvard grad, and I was working on a project, a film at that time that involved evolutionary biology, a rat plague in India. She's like, can I just ask you something? How are you as a Jesuit, as a Catholic, working on a project about evolutionary biology? Like that's like not what you believe in. So it's like, yeah, no, we do that too. We're not evangelicals. but there were a lot of interesting conversations over those years. So so I had to, that was one moment when, coming out of that experience, those 3 years, I had to rethink my vocation in a pretty profound way. I won't go into the gory details here, but I did fall in love as a Jesuit too, and that was another experience when, again, I had to rediscern things, and I had two roads diverged in a yellow wood. So I'm hesitant to sort of say, the vocation story that happened 18 years ago is the vocation story, because there's been so much that has happened as a Jesuit since, that's equally important, and trying to hear God's call at each of those moments, and for me also, a person who is not always great at making up my mind, really wrestling with those decisions sometimes hasn't always been easy. But I don't know, I just feel like at key moments the Lord has entered in, and kind of, again, where's the heart, where am I finding the peace, in spite of a lot of the challenges that come up and the different voices, where's the peace? And now I've been in Belize for 3 years. It's been an awesome 3 years. As Brian mentioned, I get to do a little bit of everything down here, working with a pretty poor community on the south side of Belize, a neighborhood where there's a lot of gang violence, which I'm sure Ian might talk a little bit more. His work at the prison. Been working with junior college students over on this side of town. Just really being a priest, a lot of sacramental ministry, a lot of funerals, a lot of anointings of the sick, a lot of masses, tons and tons of masses. Sometimes COVID's been a little bit different, but we cover some village parishes too out of St. Martin's. So just really being a full-time kind of parish priest and sort of sacramental minister for the past couple of years has been good too. So I'll stop there, but that's me.
Thanks, Jeremy. One of the interesting things about Jeremy is one of those rare Jesuits who actually has marketable skills. And so if the Society of Jesus were to be suppressed tomorrow, I'd probably go work at McDonald's, and Jeremy would be bringing in seven figures. But what's been interesting, I mean, here in Belize, we're such a small country. And when the pandemic hit, when the lockdown hit, when the churches closed and schools closed down, Jeremy really did so much, not just for the Jesuit community, but for the entire country in terms of showing churches and schools, here's how you do liturgy online. And so Jeremy was able to learn that technology himself and implement it. And then he's been doing consulting basically around the country over the last 18 months, helping people figure out how to do this. And that has been absolutely crucial. So we're going to move on here so we just had two of our priests here. We're going to go on to, we have two Jesuit regents who are here. So let's move over to Justo Gomez.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Justo Gomez. I am from Guatemala City. I'm from the province of Central America, which is from Panama to Guatemala, 6 countries. And I was assigned to do my regency here in Belize. I'm happy to be here. I'm teaching in SJC Junior College. And the classes that I have there is theology and religions of the world. It's fascinating how these questions come out with students, mainly because I'm Jesuit, but also it's like, what is this, right? Why you Jesuits like do the things that you're doing, right? For example, today I had one of the students, because we were talking about religions of the world, atheists, and all of the different dialogues that we can encounter. And she was telling, one of the students was saying, it's really nice to have a place where you can have a dialogue without feeling that pressure of people telling you why you don't believe, or if you believe, or, in a school, normally I don't have that space. And I was like, okay, fine. So it's to me, it was nice to work. It's nice to work with the youth right here in Belize and in SJC. Questions that arises in in the classes, just like vocations, some other guy, when we were doing an assignment, he talks about what is it, the priesthood, that he's trying to see what he does with his life, and what's the priesthood, right? So it's different questions, different realities, different backgrounds, and to me, I just have joy on sharing the little things that I know with the students, and so that's the thing. Then also be part of the retreats that they're putting together. So that's the thing, right? That's kind of the things that I'm doing here. In terms of vocation, well, I will say that it's just like Sam was saying, he uses 3 images. Well, I would say 3 questions. One of them, it was like, who am I? The second one, it's who are we? And third one, it's like, where's God, or what's God, right? And everything starts because I'm from Guatemala, right? When I was 4 years old, my parents moved to the States. I went to California. Right there, I did my elementary school. And then right there in California, we moved to different places. And I used to see all these different people, different cultures. And then I went back to Guatemala after I finished the elementary school. And it was a huge difference going back to Guatemala culture, right? Not just the language, but also the whole thing, right? Environment, food, the whole thing. So that was something that it was a challenge to me to say, like, okay, what's all these differences, right? I went to school and it was hard for me because it was elementary in the States. So it's like, okay, what's Spanish, the history for Guatemala. So it was a challenge to get back in Guatemala. But okay, so the question right there, it's like, who am I? With all these different cultures, with all these different languages, with all these things, like I was like questioning, who am I, right? I went and I started studying technology and business administration in Guatemala, and I studied performing arts. But still, that was a question, right? As having my, let's say, my elementary school in California, some of the things from there definitely got into me, just like hip hop, just like graffiti and all that, right? So I started being I'll say, urban artist. I like to do graffitis, rap, hip hop, murals, right? Produce music. So that's what I was doing in that time, right? So as a teenager, the question's like, who am I? Because in Guatemala, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, everything that it was related with hip hop, it was considered that you were part of a gang, right? So if because of the clothing, because of painting walls, because of that. So I was just like, I don't know, it was kind of confusing to me because it's like, this is art. This is the things that I like to do, right? But people will say like, that's not it, right? So then I'm still questioning like, what should I do? And then I met this teacher when I was studying performing arts, and she said, this is not your place, right? So you need to move. So I was like, well, this is my country. But she said, it's not your place. I was doing some rap in Spanish and English, some Spanglish. So then the second question arises because when I went back to California, I had some problems with my family and I ended up living in the streets. So there, the question is like, who are we? It's like, who is my family? Who is my people? Who is the people that that stands out for me because of different things, right? So I ended up living in the streets for like close to 2 months. And I'm like, who are we? This humanity, it's like, I got no support from nobody, right? So that question starts like, who are we? Who are we, right? But I lived over there by Figueroa Street in Los Angeles. I get a work in a taco stand, and I start getting better, and I started doing well. Why I went to California? Because of the music, right? So in California, I get some gigs. I start doing some hip hop. I start doing some music, and but I wanted to know like where this comes from, right? Like hip hop culture, because I was doing it. I feel that that was my thing. but I was in Guatemala. That was not the place. Then I went to California, and they were saying, no, that came from New York. So I was like, where is this from, you know? So then I had a friend that was a DJ, one of the clubs in New York, and he said, why don't you come over? Let's give it a try, right? So I had some other friend that he was in a youth group in a parish, and he will always say, come over. But I was like, I don't want to know nothing about family, friends, because of my experience, right? But anyways, I moved to New York just to get a try to see what's that about. So I moved to New York. The DJ that invited me, he was from Guatemala. I knew him because we studied performing arts, and he had a place in Manhattan, and he tells me when I get there, you know what? I have just some problems with my wife. I need to go back to Guatemala. She's pregnant, and there's something wrong with the pregnancy. So I need to go back. So there you go. You have the apartment. It's good for a month, but then you'll have to, pay the thing, right? So I was like, okay, here I am again with nothing, right? So the question, it's like, okay, who are we? But what's this, right? So I start again gigs and stuff. I end up in a radio station. I end up doing events, promoting events, doing music, producing music. But then when I was in this radio, I was doing interviews, right? So I was interviewing people that they were doing rap music and stuff. So some of them, I will invite them for the gigs that we had, right? But then these people will say like, no, I can't do it because I gotta work, right? Or I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And then my question was like, aren't you saying in your music that you are like all tough, bling bling, and all that stuff? So that just got me into the crisis of saying like, this is not real either. Like all what I've been looking for is just superficial. That's something that can't like hold me. So I was like, what's this, right? But I just got to mention, I want to stop right here. My parents, they always say something, and that's always in my heart. And my dad and my mom will say all the time, like, no matter the problems that you have, mijo, like wherever you go, God is with you. All right. You may have problems with us, even like parents. You may have problems with your friends, with anybody, but God is just there, right? So when I was in that situation, right, in New York, I was like, okay, now my last question is, where's God, right? What is this? What is it that my mom used to say? What is it that I used to do, right? The prayers with my family and all this. So then I moved upstate New York with this friend of mine, and he was going to this youth group on this parish, St. Joseph in Spring Valley. So there, because of this question, I start studying theology, and I started a job that I've never done. I don't know what was that, but anyways, I got into landscaping. People was like, dude, you were in the radio, you were doing this, and now you're doing landscaping. And I'm like, I don't care. I have my question and I need to see what's that, right? So, okay, so there I am, right? But I want to finish this a little bit with these questions. While I was doing all this, there were some questions that triggered this main question of what should I do with my life and my vocation, right? Because I was living in this apartment, and this guy from India became a good friend. One of the days that I was there, he said, Justo, people from this house, from this building, they know me, they know you, and they say that you have the highest rent in this building. I'm like, for real? And he said, yeah, because you live in the church and you're paying here rent. And I'm like, okay, that's like that was just right there on my heart. And then when I went to then we have an event. I wrote a play. I was directing the play, and I remember that after the play, there were more than 500 people in the place. But all the people that it was part of the play, their family will jump over, take some pictures, and after the play, everybody's celebrating and stuff. And I'm just looking at all of them. I didn't have no family there. I was just some friends, right? One of my first years there. And I see that the pastor from the church and from the place comes and tells me, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Man, I'm seeing how these people's having fun, right?" And I thought that he was going to say, like, let's go eat, or let's have fun, right? But he said, "All right, just leave them. Let's pick up the chairs. We need to clean." And I was like, "Dude, I'm the director. I put this together." And so I was kind of upset. But next day, he calls me to his office and he said, "Who's I need to talk to you?" So I was okay, fine. So he said, "Look, I just want to ask you something. Are you happy in church?" I said, "Yeah," right? And he said, "Are you getting paid?" And I said, "No." So then, and next question was, "Where you are working, you get paid, right?" "Yeah." "But are you happy? You want to keep on doing that for the rest of your life?" And then I was like, well, not really, So then those questions start triggering up, like, what am I doing, right? So he said, "Why you don't give it a shot? You're happy in church. You doing all this with the youth. You like to work. You like to do things. So give it a try." So so that's how it started. I started in church. I started in the youth group. My mom, I didn't know this, but my mom used to work with in a little hospital where Jesuits were in Guatemala. So when I told her, "Mom, I want to see what's up with the religious life," she said, "Well, the Jesuits." I remember that when I was asking this to my mom, she was in a speaker. My dad heard that, and he was working for the embassy of the United States in Guatemala. So he kind of knew how was the thing back in the times of the Civil War in Guatemala and El Salvador. So my dad said, "Dude, go with the Jesuits. They were over there in the villages when the Civil War was here. They were the ones right there, just like with the people. So you're that kind of person. So just give it a try." And that's pretty much how I got to know the Jesuits. I went to Guatemala, and then I went to El Salvador to do the interviews. And the rest is pretty much history. Whenever I have like different questions, or like Jeremy was saying, some sort of crisis, I go back to this and I say, well, where's my heart? Where do I feel happy? Where I am right now with my questions, and who am I? Who are we? And who's God in all this? So yeah, that's pretty much about it. And I did first studies in Guadalajara. Then I was assigned to come here, and that's part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Justo. Justo, I've heard bits and pieces of your story, but I don't think I've ever heard the whole thing altogether. So thanks for that. Justo is, as you can tell from his story, he's a man of multiple talents. Radio personality, hip hop artist, graffiti artist, taco maker. Apparently, I didn't realize that. He can cut hair like nobody's business. Yeah, he's a barber, but he's also got this incredible ability. You knew I was going to call you out on this, Justo. He's got this hidden talent where he's able to make a sound of a crying baby like nobody I've ever heard. Justo, could you share that with us, please?
That's part of being on the radio.
That's right. That's endless fun during pandemic. Okay, finally, we've got Ian Peoples, who is a second-year regent with us. Ian transitioned here to Belize right during pandemic, so it was a really tough time to be here. His regency assignment is a tough assignment. So he is stationed out of Belize Central Prison. There's only one prison here in Belize because we're a small place, and he kind of went into a job that there was no job description. We just sort of said, "Ian, go to the prison and figure out how we can be present there. Figure out how you're going to be present there." That's a really, really hard regency assignment, but he has done a fantastic job. He works in the youth facility, Wagner's youth facility, and he's during the pandemic, he was bringing in computers to keep the education going with kids. Even though he couldn't go into the prison, he was still meeting one-on-one virtually. So he's been doing great work here. Ian, go ahead.
Thanks, BC. Like BC said, my name's Ian Peoples. I'll talk about my work at the prison here in a few minutes. Just a quick word about my vocation story. I'm a military brat, an Air Force brat. So I was born in California. And then when I was 3, I moved to Missouri. And then when I was about 8, I moved to Texas. And I grew up in Texas in the Fort Worth Diocese near Wichita Falls. So I got some guys around that area. Yeah, growing up, I call my family, our Catholicism was just strong, basic Catholicism, not particularly devout, but just like we prayed before meals, we prayed before we went to bed, we went to mass on Sundays. We didn't pray the rosary, we didn't do any Divine Mercy chaplets or novenas. All those things are lovely, but it was just very basic, very strong. Like, just here's what we do. And so I'm grateful for that, because my parents raised me just, immersed in, just this basic, strong Catholicism. So, and I had really good examples of priests growing up, particularly a Vietnamese priest named Father Hoa Nguyen, who's an amazing guy, taught me my first soccer tricks. And now, as my community well knows, and is probably a little annoyed by, I'm a soccer fanatic. So I grew up playing that, and that was really, so he taught me my first soccer trick, the rainbow, which is where you flick it up over your head. And so I think it's interesting that a priest is the one that taught me this first move, because I really see these two things as two passions in my life, like my faith and football, as I get to call it here in Belize. And they've kind of intertwined, and sometimes football has been first, unfortunately, but now I think most of the time faith comes first. So growing up, I played soccer, and I eventually went to college to play soccer at St. Edward's University. It's a D2 school in Austin, Texas. And so I played there for a couple of years, and it was during this time where that strong basic Catholicism kind of just fell away, because my independence and being in a big city, I grew up in a small town, being in a bigger city, just being, in a more secular place. Austin's a very fun place. And so I kind of I put faith to the side. I never stopped believing in God or anything like that, but I just kind of put faith to the side and kind of stepped away from practicing for about a year and a half. And it was during that time where I feel like eventually God kind of held up a mirror for me and said, "Hey, Ian, like, this is you right now. Are you happy with who you are?" And I really didn't like who I was, like how I was treating people, just how I was spending my time. And it really God kind of breaking through and helping me realize that I was missing something in my life. I was missing, that relationship with God that I had growing up. And so I eventually started praying again, started praying the Lord's Prayer. A long story short, I was praying the Lord's Prayer, kind of meditating. And before I even knew what a colloquy was, which is a conversation that we have with Jesus, Mary, or the saints in the spiritual exercises, a prayerful conversation, I was having a colloquy with Jesus. And I said, as I was praying the Lord's Prayer, I was repeating, lead us not into temptation. And I asked Jesus, "Okay, Jesus, if you're going to lead, what do you want me to do?" And I didn't hear the words, right? That would make me crazy, but I felt this call in my heart, quit soccer. It was immediate. It didn't feel like it was from me. But it popped into my heart just like that. Quit soccer. And this was a couple of days before our season was about to begin, my junior year of college. But I slept on it, and I just couldn't shake this feeling that God was calling me to quit soccer. Ended up quitting soccer. And so when you step away from soccer in college or any sport or any sort of activity like that, that's really a full-time gig. And so I had a lot more time on my hands, and I had no friends because all my friends were on the soccer team. So I ended up connecting with a buddy of mine who I did a high school retreat with, a really important retreat in my life called the Acts Retreat, Adoration Community Theology Service. And then his group of friends was just a bunch of good Catholic guys, and they eventually just were witnesses for me about what it means to be a good Catholic man, and they started drawing me back in. One of those guys was discerning a vocation to the Society of Jesus, and so he kind of clued me into who the Jesuits are. He gave me a book by Jim Martin called Becoming Who You Are, which talks about sanctity and sainthood as God calling us to fully embrace who he created us to be. And so that was sort of revolutionary for me in my thinking. And it eventually led me to really start diving back into my faith. I ended up leaving school that semester. That was my last semester at school. I got in a little financial trouble. I discerned I need to leave. And so I left, and that's when I went back home. And after several months, I started going to daily mass again. And I befriended a priest who just started putting books in my hands. And finally, really kind of feeling this call to priesthood, which I'd felt when I was younger, as early as 3rd or 4th grade, especially through the example of this Vietnamese priest that I was talking about. But I always imagined myself as like wanting to have 3 kids and a girl, just like my family. I have 2 older brothers and a little sister. And, my parents have stayed together, thanks be to God, their whole life. And I kind of wanted what my family had, right? So I said I would become a deacon when I grew up. But then as I started getting back into my faith, that priest question started coming back into my heart. And so I decided I was going to do a volunteer year. And so I did a volunteer year. The summer before I went to start that volunteer year, I went on a retreat, which was, I didn't have any money to go on an 8-day retreat because they can be pretty expensive. And I hope, my desire was that we make young adult retreats more affordable, especially this 8-day silent retreat. But it ended up being paid for by a friend of this priest I was talking about, who's a lawyer, went gambling right across the border in Texas one day. He won a ton of money. He didn't know what to do with it. And so he said, Father Richard, what should I do with this? Father Richard said, well, I have a guy who wants to go on a retreat. On this retreat, on the 4th day during Mass, I really felt like God revealed to me his deepest desire for me, which was my deepest desire. And it was to become a Jesuit. I really felt this so powerfully, kind of brought me to tears, which I don't experience often. And I return to that moment still. So I like to tell people that my vocation was sort of bought by a lawyer's gambling money. So, which is about right for my life, I think. And so eventually, a couple of years later, it took me a couple of years still. This volunteer year was at a treatment center for at-risk youth, which was a place that really taught me the importance of prayer and going into difficult spaces, which I'm using now, especially going into the prison. And then two years later after this, in 2015, I entered. Since then, just so much grace, right, in this life. And it hasn't been easy, right? It's not always easy, but just kind of looking at my life in light of the spiritual exercises, in light of this call that I know I've received, and that I lean on, especially when times get tough. And being surrounded by these guys that you just met here and so many more. It's just, I give thanks to God every day because I have brothers who inspire me to live this life. I have, Jesus who, constantly is calling me to give more of myself to really be with him, especially in the people that we get to serve, which I'll just say a word about my work at the prison. So I'm working with juveniles, so guys usually 13 to 18 years old. The average age, I would say, is 16. Most of the guys there are gang-involved youth. Most of them are from the south side of Belize City, which is where St. Martin de Porres, our parish, is. Most of them are, or over half of them are there remanded on murder, which means they've been charged with murder, but they haven't completed their trials yet, so they haven't been sentenced. So it's a very raw space. It's a very difficult place to go in, because all of these guys are in crisis modes in their life, right? They're all in prison, right? I hesitate to call it a juvenile detention facility because it is a prison. It's hard time, right? It's not an easy place to be. So, just meeting kids who were born into violent neighborhoods and really didn't have a lot of options in their life. Not to excuse maybe some of the actions that they may have taken, but they're born into families where all the men are gang involved, and so that's just what men do. And so they get involved, and then they make some dumb mistakes, or somebody puts a gun in their hand and tells them to go take care of somebody else, or things like that. So it's a very raw space where these guys are dealing with very real consequences, a lot of trauma, physical, sexual, emotional abuse in their lives, substance abuse. So I feel very, part of me feels like, man, why am I here? Because what can I do? But one thing that I know I can do, and this is really rooted in my own call to be a Jesuit, which is really to proclaim God's relentless mercy to people, God's relentless compassion for those who know themselves, who are sinners, right? And to recognize that, and that's the first week of the exercises for us, to come to know ourselves as sinners, but only so that we can accept and embrace this incredible love and mercy that God is always offering us. And so that's something that a desire that led me to discern a regency here, which I was thankful to be missioned here by my superiors. And it's really something that I get to live out every day at the prison, proclaiming that love and that mercy. And that's something I'm really grateful for. So I'll stop there. I know we're on time. It's already 7. So yeah, back to you, Father Murphy.
Sure. And we're going to take a quick break here in a second. But before we do, Father Brian is just going to talk a little bit. He's the provincial's assistant for international ministry, or he can correct me if I got that wrong, international. So he's going to talk a little bit about, we mentioned to you guys that the Jesuits are an international order, so we're in a different country, but Father Brian also has that scope. And so he's just going to talk a little bit about kind of the international society for us.
As Father Murphy said, when we enter the Jesuits, we don't enter a province, we enter a worldwide order. And that's more than just a saying. That was true from the very beginning of the Jesuits. That was true from the early inspiration of the Society of Jesus. Geronimo Nadal, who was one of the early Jesuits and really one of the guys who put a shape to this religious order, he was fond of saying, and quite famously, that the world is our home, right? That we don't belong to a diocese, we don't belong to a country. The world is our home, right? And why is that? Well, that's because God is in all things. God is everywhere. And so anywhere where God is, any place or any realm of human activity, we're at home there, right? So that's very true. And I think for many years in the history of the Society of Jesus, I think in some ways we lost sight of that. We had for many years we had a lot of vocations. We had a heck of a lot of Jesuits. We were building bigger and bigger houses of formation, and that was good, right? It was an embarrassment of riches. On the other hand, we didn't really have the need to go abroad. We didn't have the need to see ourselves as an international society, because at least in the United States for a lot of years, we kind of took care of ourselves. We were doing okay. Now with our numbers having gone down so much, in some ways there's a blessing in that, right? And the blessing is that now we have to understand that we have to connect, we have to collaborate, we have to reach out beyond our borders, and that's how we get work done. So it's a very, calling ourselves an international religious order is not just some pie in the sky idea. It's a very practical reality. And in the US and Canada, the province that kind of embodies that, I think, well, I'm biased, but the province that I think embodies it the most clearest is the Central Southern Province, because we are, even though our name is United States Central and Southern Province, we are made up of 3 countries. We are a truly international province. Of course, there's the United States, but there's also Puerto Rico, and there's also Belize. And Puerto Rico and Belize are not just add-ons to the US province. We are the province. We are part of this province, right? So we are a truly international province. And one of the interesting, Belize has really taught me a lot about the international society in a couple different ways. Number one, we are located right on the border between the Caribbean and Latin America, and Belize is very much a connecting piece. So I'm going to meetings in the Caribbean among Jesuits there. I'm connecting with Jesuits in Central America, and we're finding ways to work together, again, because we have to. We absolutely have to. And one of the reasons why we have to, and here's the other thing that I learned in Belize, I'm going to say this and then I'll be quiet. Ian mentioned this and Jeremy mentioned this as well, that Belize has a lot of murders. We have a huge difficulty with street gangs and with poverty. And one of the things that drives the murder rate here is the drug trafficking, right? Belize is, since early 2000s, Belize has been a major stop. It's been a major node in the drug pipeline, all these illegal drugs going up to the United States. 90% of the cocaine in the United States comes through this narrow corridor of Guatemala and Belize, and most of that comes through Belize. And that drives all of this killing. But one of the things that struck me is this, the kids that we bury here in Belize who are getting killed through gang violence, drug-related violence, it's the same phenomenon that's killing our kids here, that's also killing our kids, let's say in North St. Louis, right? Or in Houston or Kansas City, or pick your place in our province, right? And so we're dealing with these structures that are truly international. And I feel like as a Jesuit, we have the possibility of going after those structures and maybe, if not transforming them, at least challenging those structures, because we are also an international organization. We can do things that nations can't because we're thinking across borders, and we're still learning how to do this. But for me, that's something really important about what it means to be an international order. Is we got to learn, and we're still learning, like I said, to think across borders and to act across borders. So with that, I'm gonna be quiet.